In this video, we're going to demonstrate how to use Excel to conduct a RFM analysis, recency, frequency, and monetary. So what you see here is the data. On the left, we have the transaction history. As you can see, transactions are numbered from 1, etc., all the way to 100,000. So this is perhaps the biggest data you see in this class. And then in column B are the customers represented by their customer numbers. In column C are the date of purchase, and column D is the purchase amount. So this is a very standard purchase history data where you have each customer, their purchase date, and how much they have purchased. If the data includes more detail, you may actually also know what kind of product they have purchased. So in the next few columns are some additional data that we use. Column F here. So assuming the present day is the 30th of September in 2022. So this is the present day, which is going to be used to calculate recency in this data. In the next block, so we are looking at a context of a company like J.Crew, where the company would mail brochures to the customers, and the customers may order from the brochures. So there is a mailing cost of each brochure is 50 cents. And let's say the profit for each order that the customer placed is $20. So you make $20 on each order, and the mail order cost is 50 cents. So the problem you're facing is not every mail would yield an order. So you send out a lot of brochures that will become trash without creating any orders. So given the profit of $20 per order and each mail, the mailing cost is 50 cents. So we can easily calculate a break-even point where we can figure out what percentage of mail have to be responded in order for us to break even. So what is that number? So the calculation is like this. Let's say for each order we're creating $20 of profit. This is the profit side. We want this to be equal to the cost side. That is, the cost of sending the mail is 50 times how many orders do we send it to. So times orders. Here, if we calculate the number of orders that allows this equation to be equal, then that number is the break-even number of orders that we need to mail out. So the break-even orders would basically be equal to 20 divided by 0.5. And that number is basically, let me change this, is basically 40. So we need to create at least one sale on every 40 brochures that we mail out in order to break even. If we receive less than one for every 40, then we're going to lose money mailing these things out. So the response rate here really matters. So the question is, what is the response rate of 1 out of 40? So let me use this same cell to do the calculation. So what's the response rate of 1 out of 40? It's equal to 0.025. And if we put this in percentage terms, increase the dots, that's 2.5%. So we need to have at least 2.5% of the response rate on our mailed out brochures for us not to lose money doing this. So that's one number that we're going to use later to make a decision on who are the customers that we should be sending the brochure to. And the third table is what we're going to use to do RFM calculations. Next, we have a separate response table. So the big table on the left, this is our transaction history. And the table on the right, this is our mail order response history. That is, for each customer, did they respond to our mailed out brochure? If they didn't respond to the brochure, then the response is marked as 0. If they responded to the brochure, then this is marked as 1. So obviously customer 1 didn't respond to our brochure, and customer 2 did, customer 5 did, customer 19 did, etc. This is the data that we use to generate the RFM calculations. So to prepare for the next calculations, first I want to create some names for the data that we have here. So the way we do this is first, I'm going to select this big table on the left. So again, we have talked about this. Hold down the Control and Shift key and press right and release, and then press down and release. So now we have selected the whole table. And what we are going to do next is we want to create the names for each one of the columns. Go to Formulas and click this. Here it says Create from Selection. So when you clicked Create from Selection, it's going to give you this menu where it allows you to create a name from values in the top row, left column, bottom row, right column. So this is very convenient. And what we want is to create a name from the top row. So it's going to create 4 different names for us simultaneously when we do this. So click OK. And now we can check the names we have created. Go to Name Manager, click Name Manager. And now you see that it has created 4 names: amount, customer, date, and transaction. And each one of these names correspond to the data column that we have selected. So this is quite convenient. Let's close this. And similarly, we want to create a name for this that we want to use later. So select the first cell, hold down Control Shift and down, select the whole column, and then click Create from Selection. Again, we're going to use the top row, and it's done. So you can check it. Now we have created an additional name response that covers this whole range we have just selected. So next, we're going to start the RFM calculations. First, in column K, let's type down the name we want to use for this column. Let's call this Total Transactions. So this column, in this column, we are going to store the total number of transactions that each customer has over the purchase history. So we're going to use a formula that we have used before, equals count if. So we're going to use count if to calculate the number of transactions for each customer. So the way we use count if is first it asks for a range, and then it asks for a criteria. So in this case, the range that we want to look into is the customer ID in column B. We already named it, so we're going to use customer, and the criteria that we choose is the customer ID that we have next to it in cell J2. And then close the parentheses, return. So this gives us the total number of transactions from this data that customer 1 has. And then we can copy this all the way down to all the customers. Just double click on the lower right corner. So that gives us the total transactions. The next thing we want to prepare in order to calculate RFM is the most recent purchase. So let's call this most recent. And for most recent, when you think about what most recent is really the maximum date that the customer has purchased the product. So except that we cannot just find the maximum date in this date column, we have to also match the customer ID. So it will be the maximum date that customer 1 has made the purchase. So this we're going to learn a slightly different operation, but we have seen both of these formulas before. So what we are doing here is we want to find the maximum date, right? So the maximum date formula is max, and we want the maximum date, but only if the date has a matching customer ID in it. So we're going to put a if command within max. So if parenthesis, and the test we want is if the customer ID that we have already named is equal to the customer ID here in cell J2. And if the customer ID matches, then we're going to calculate the maximum date. So we're going to take the date out. If the customer ID does not match, then we just return something empty. Again, for something empty, just use the quotation mark twice. So quote. And then we close the if command, and then we close the max command, and then return. So as you see here, Excel does not know that this is a date, so naturally you're going to see a big integer here. We want to go back to home and then change this to a date. So now you see here, this allows us to see the most recent purchase date for customer 1. And we can copy this all the way down to all the customers by double-click here. Because we have a lot of transactions and a lot of customers, so this copy may take a bit time, just be patient. So this is the most recent purchase. We also want to calculate the earliest purchase, so that will be the start date. And the calculation for the start date is very similar. The only difference is instead of the max, we are now doing the mean, the minimum. So equals mean, and within the parentheses we have a if the customer ID is equal to J2. If that's the case, then we're going to calculate the minimum of the date. So we already have date named and comma, and if the customer ID does not match, we're going to return something empty, double quotation marks, close if, close main, and enter. Again, the date is just a big integer. We need to change this to date so that we have the date here. So now copy this. Now we have both the most recent date and the earliest date. So next we want to calculate how long the customer has been with us. So years with us. So measured by years, how many years has the customer been with us? And of course, in order to calculate the number of years with us, we need to know what's the cutoff date for the calculation. So what's the end date? And this is the end date that I've talked about earlier. The present date we use is September 30th, 2022. And then the years with us is equal to, parenthesis, here the present date. We want this cell to be locked down when we copy this formula. So tap the F4 key so that this formula is fixed. So the present day minus the start date in cell M2. So that gives us how many days there are between the present day and the start date of the customer. And since we want to calculate the years the customer is with us, this calculation would give us the number of days. So this will be divided by the number of days per year. So that would give us the number of years. And each year has 365, actually 0.25 days. And that's because we have a leap year every 4 years, which means for each year we actually have an extra quarter of a day. So that's why it's divided by 365.25. And then enter. So this number has a lot of digits after the decimal point, kind of hard to read. Let's simplify it by shrinking the number of zeros. Yeah. So this is what we have. Customer 1 is with us for 3.67 years, so approximately 3 years and 8 months. And let's copy this, double click. And that's the number of years with us. So the reason why we calculate the number of years is we want to calculate the customer's monetary value. Let me type this down. So we want to calculate the customer's monetary value, but because some customers may have been with us longer than the others, so this how long they've been with us is different. If we just calculate the dollar value alone, it will not be a fair comparison. So we want to calculate the dollar value per year in order to have a fair comparison across different customers in monetary value. So in order to calculate the monetary value, what we want is to sum up what's in column D, the dollar amount a customer has spent for each specific customer, and then divide that number by the number of years they're with us. So the formula we use is SUMIF, and the if condition is the customer ID has to match up. So SUMIF, and the range is in column B, that's customer, and comma, and the criteria is it has to be equal to the customer ID we have here in cell J2, and then comma. And the range we want to sum up is the dollar amount. So we have already named it. That's amount. And then we close the parenthesis. So this gives us the sum of the dollar amount for each customer. Remember, they're with us for a different length of time. So divide that by the number of years with us. So that's the monetary value for this customer on a per year basis. So then enter. And again, it's a lot of zeros. Let's change this to dollar. And now we have the monetary value for customer 1. And then we just copy this. It will go all the way down to all the customers. So for RFM, we're looking at recency, frequency, and monetary. So we have already calculated this monetary value. Next, let's calculate the frequency of transactions. So the frequency is simply the number of transactions in cell K2 divided by the number of years with us. So how many transactions per year? And enter. Shorten this number to make it easier to read. Double click here to copy this. Okay, so that's the frequency. Now we have calculated the raw numbers in terms of the recency, the frequency, and the monetary. But these are just the raw values. So in order to simplify this so that we can create more clear definition of different customer segments, we're going to look at the relative rank of each customer compared with all the other customers in terms of their recency, frequency, and monetary. So if you select all the customers, you can see that we have 5,000 customers in total. Next, we're going to create the relative rank of each customer compared with all the 5,000 customers. So we're going to calculate the rank, recency, rank, frequency, and the rank monetary. So to prepare for the rank calculations, let's name the columns that we have just calculated by selecting the first row and then do Control Shift and down to select columns K to P, and then go to Formulas, Create from Selection, and then use top row, click OK, And as you click on Name Manager, you'll see that all these additional columns have names now. So Excel has a formula for calculating ranks. It's literally called a rank, parenthesis, and the number we're looking at for recency is cell L2. That's the most recent purchase of this customer, comma. And the reference is to compare to all the other customers. We know that we have already named that range of data most recent. So type most, and the names cannot hold space, so Excel would automatically replace space with underscore. So just type in underscore and then recent. Okay. The last parameter is whether you want the output rank to be in descending order or ascending order. And for us, we want this to be in ascending order, so we're going to choose 1 and then close the parenthesis and then enter. So now that gives the rank of this most recent date, August 30th, 2022, as the rank of 2,117 out of the 5,000 customers. And similarly, we can calculate this for frequency equals rank, and the number is the frequency with respect to all the frequencies we have named. That's also named frequency. You can actually use the mouse to select this by double click. And then again, the order is ascending, so choose 1 and parentheses and enter. So that's ranked 490. And finally, the rank for monetary equals rank, and the monetary value, so the purchase per year, is this number, is O2, and a comma, and with respect to all the monetary values. So double click this, and comma, and type 1, choosing ascending order, and then close the parenthesis. So now we have this customer's rank for recency, frequency, and monetary with respect to all the 5,000 customers in this data. And select all 3 columns and double click on the lower right corner, and then we can copy all the 3 columns. So finally, we're going to use this relative rank we have calculated to create the usual system that's used in an RFM system. That is, we use the relative rank to give each customer a score of R, a score of F, and a score of M. And the score is converted from the rank. So this is what the third table here is used for. And what we are looking at is basically when the customer is ranked from 0 up until 1,000, right below here, then the RFM score is 1, so it's the lowest. So the lowest quintile is scored as 1. And then from 1,001 to 2,000, the RFM score would be 2, etc. So as you see, so this RFM score would have a range from 1 to 5, and each one reflects a quintile. And because we have used ascending order in our calculations here, so our RFM scores would be the higher this value, the better. The higher, which means the customers has been more recent, more frequent, and higher in monetary purchase. So we are going to use this small table to find out the RFM score based on their rank. And as you have guessed, we're going to use a formula that we have used before, VLOOKUP. And the value we are looking up for R is basically the rank of recency, comma, And the table or array that we want to use is here. And because we are going to repeatedly querying this stuff, we can either name this or we can lock this down. So in this case, I'm going to just lock this down by using the F4 key. So now you see dollar signs in front of the whole range. When we copy this formula, that range is going to stay in the same place. And then comma. And the column that we want to get back is basically the second column, these 1 to 5 values. So it's 2. And then finally, there's optional on whether we are doing an approximate match or exact match. Remember, approximate match of numbers are looking for the lower bound. So we are actually, in this case, doing an approximate match. So put in true there and close this and enter. So now we have the R score here. And since we already have RFM calculated right in front of it, this formula can be copied to the right. When you drag this to the right, you're going to see that automatically in this formula, it's going to look up for the frequency value in this table and assign a frequency score. And similarly, we have the monetary. Now we are done with this. We can just select the 3 cells and double click to copy them all the way down. So now we have assigned each customer an RFM score. So we can already use these RFM scores to create customer segments. The goal is actually to look at, for each segment, what is the response rate to the mail order, so that we can see which segment of customers actually respond to the mailed brochure better, so that we can select the segments that are more responsive to the brochures, and those are the customers we're going to target because we have better response rate and our brochures would have a better return of investment when we mail to those segments. So since we're using 1 to 5 to score R, F, or M, and how many segments are we going to get? The number of segments we're going to get is basically 5 different R scores times 5 different F scores and times 5 different M scores. And the number of combinations we have is 5 times 5 times 5. That's 125 different segments. It may look a lot to do this manually, but for most big companies, 125 segments is more than manageable in a customer relationship management database. So in our case, we're going to have 125 segments. So next, I'm going to create a table next to this. Let me scroll to the right. I will start from column Y, and we're going to type down R, F, and M. So I will create the segments that we are going to look at. Consider this. The R score is 1, F score is 1, and the M score is 1. So that will be the first segment. And to do this a little bit faster, let's say first we fix the R and F to be 1s, and then we allow M to vary to 2, 3, 4, and 5. So M has varied from 1 to 5. So after that, I'm going to allow F to vary and still keep R constant. I'm going to use the existing F and then plus 1, so it will be 2. So now let me copy this down. As you're going to see that when I copy this down, I start to see that it automatically will add 1. So after 2, I'll see 3. After that, I'll get 4. After that, I'll get 5. But I don't need anything more than 5, so I'll delete these. So now I'll keep R still the same, at 1, and f now varies in blocks from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5. And within each band, I have R is 1, F is 2, and now monetary, I can allow monetary within this band to vary from 1 to 5. So I will copy this, and then I'll select the whole range, and then use Control V. So I'll paste this down. So as you can see here, what I have is R is fixed, but F and M both vary the whole range. So this block actually would complete 25 of the 125 segments. So next I just need to repeat this part 5 times, and then at the same time vary R from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5. So for this, I will do the same trick, equals this plus 1. So this allows it to vary to 2, but only have 25 of them. So if I start copy this down, so since we have 125 segments, this should stop somewhere around here. Yep. It stops at 5, so now I'm varying R from 1 to 5 in 25 blocks each. So after that, I will copy F and M, and I will select F and M all the way to where R stops, and then I use Control V and paste this down. So as you see here, what I have is from 111 all the way to 555. So I have created all the possible combinations of these 125 segments. Let me just name this segment, and segment 1, 2, etc. Select the first 2, double click, and as you can see here, we have 125 segments in total. My goal is actually to look at for each segment how many customers are there in the segment, and how many of them have responded to the mailed brochure. Then I can calculate the response rate in each one of the segments. So the calculations I want to do next are, I want to calculate the number of customers, and I want to calculate how many of them responded, and then I can calculate the response rate. So these are the 3 things I want to calculate next. So to calculate the customers in each segment, let me first name these 3 columns, R, F, and M. I'm going to select these 3 columns, Control Shift right, Control Shift down, and then create from selection, and using the top row, click OK. One thing that you want to note here is if you click Name Manager, you're going to see that for frequency F and monetary M, they are both named using the first row. And for recency R, Excel has added an underscore behind it because the name R is reserved by Excel, so it automatically added underscore here. So we're going to use this as our underscore. Now, going back here, we want to calculate the number of customers that are matching this segment in terms of their RFM scores. So the formula is we're going to use count ifs. So count ifs, parentheses. And if the criteria range first is if the column of R is equal to this, comma, and the second criteria is if F is equal to this in Z2, And finally, if m, comma, is equal to the monetary of the segments. So that gives us the number of customers in this segment. So there are 261 customers here. Double click, and we know the number of customers in each one of these segments. And as you see here at the bottom, you can see Excel tells you that sum is 5,000. That's actually the total number of customers we have. So next, we're going to calculate how many have responded. So to calculate this, again, we're going to use conifs. Again, we're going to match up the profiles. So we will have to have r underscore comma is equal to y2, and f is equal to this, and m is this. So in addition to that, we're going to need whether someone has responded. So that would be the information in column I. And remember, we have already named this as response. So it will be response, comma, that matches that the customer has responded is 1. So the response criteria is 1, value is 1, and then close the parenthesis, enter, and that gives us the number of customers in each segment who have responded to the mailed brochure. Double click, and now we have the number of customers responded and the total number of customers. We can calculate the response rate. And then equals the number responded divided by the number of customers, enter. And for response rate, we're going to use percentages. So let's go to home and then format that as percentage. I'm going to keep a couple of more digits. Okay, so now we can copy this. But when you copy it, you're going to see that there will be a lot of divide by zeros because there are segments where you have no customer. So it will give you the arrow. It looks very annoying. So let's clean this up. Go to the first one. Let's add an additional formula. It helps us clean this up. So the formula is called if arrow. Parenthesis. So what this formula does is if there's no arrow, it's going to calculate this again. But, comma, if there's arrow, what do you want to put there instead of showing divided by 0 arrow? So if there's arrow, we're going to just put the response rate as 0 because there's no one in that segment. That means there's no one to respond. So the response rate should be 0. So close the if arrow formula by typing in the parentheses and press enter. So now let's copy the new formula down and double click here. So now everything looks fine. We no longer have the divide by 0 problem. Different segments have different response rate, and as we have calculated earlier that we need at least 2.5% response rate on these mail orders to break even. So let's say we want to mark out these segments that have at least twice the response rate. That is twice the response rate of 2.5%. So it's 5% response rate. We want to mark out the segments that have at least 5% response rate. Here we can use conditional formatting to do this. And I'm going to introduce a slightly more complicated form of conditional formatting that allows you to conditional format this whole row based on the single value in cell 82 instead of only conditional formatting this. So what I'm saying is basically if you conditional formatting, so let's say if I conditional format this column directly, click conditional format, and I want to highlight cells using rules and using greater than, so if it's greater than 5%. So click on this and type in 5%. So if it's greater than 5%, then I can fill this with a color. So the problem with this method is it works, but it only would format the cells with that value. What if I want to conditional format this whole row based on the value in the last cell of this row? So we're going to learn a slightly more sophisticated conditional formatting by clicking this little arrow here on conditional formatting, and then we can go to manage rules. So we're going to see the current conditional formatting rules here. So it lists all the rules, but in this case we have only one that we have just created. We know this rule does not work that well, so let's get rid of it, deleting rule, and click OK. So when you come back, conditional formatting is gone. So that's actually how you get rid of existing conditional formatting. So next, we go back to conditional formatting, and then we're going to create a new rule. And in this case, we're going to select the last one, use a formula to determine which cell to format. And first, we're going to create the values where this formula is true. So we're going to choose the cell 82. And the rule we set is 82 is larger than 5%. So that's the rule we want to set. And as you see here, once you select 82, Excel automatically has put dollar signs in front of them. So this formula is fixed at cell 82. We want this formula to apply to all the rows here. So we need to allow this to extend beyond row 2, but stay at column AD. So stay at column AD means column AD is still locked with the dollar sign, but row 2 can be applied elsewhere. So we can copy around the rows. So we get rid of that dollar sign, so it's $AD and just row 2. And the format we want is, let's click on this, is to, let's say we want to fill the area that we want with this orange color. Click OK, and then click OK. So once you create a rule, it only applies to this specific cell. So what we need to do is next to go to conditional formatting again, and then go to manage rules. We want this rule to apply not just to cell 82 itself. By deleting this, we want this to apply to this whole area. So we can select this whole area. Okay, so all the 125 different segments. And then now if we click OK, you're going to see that now the whole row is highlighted when the response rate is above 5%. And it's much easier to see which are the segments. So in practice, for a company that wants to have a good response rate in their mail order, this is what they do. So they identify all these segments with high enough response rates to the mail order. And the highlighted rows are the segments that you want to target. And then next, you can label each customer's segment, and then that will decide whether we mail the promotion brochure to those specific segments. That concludes this video.